All right, here now is Mike Baker, a former CIA officer. Mike, I mean, let's start with the escalation that is going on right now between these two countries. What do you make of it?
Well, look, every nation acts in its own best interest, and it's in neither Iran nor Israel's interest to allow this to escalate into a full-blown conflict. It was interesting because, it was, I guess, the day after President Trump had scuttled the Iran deal, that people wanted to draw a direct line to Iran's, launching attacks at Israel and saying, look, this is what happens when you step away from this deal. But the reality is that Iran, for the past few months now, has been busy escalating their movements of military hardware, gear, and personnel into Syria. They've been actively engaged in setting up permanent bases in Syria. And so this has been a problem in the making. Israel has been escalating their attacks against that effort over the past few weeks. So this has been bubbling away under the surface.
So you don't think there's a connection?
Oh, no, well, I don't think there's a connection to scuttling the Iran deal. No, I think what we've got is Iranian increasingly encroaching in the Middle East. But they've got greater influence in the Middle East now than they've had in modern times. And so whether we're talking about them establishing these bases in Syria or whether we're talking about their actions in Lebanon or in Yemen or elsewhere, you could say that the Iran deal, in a way,
right? I was going to make that point, Mike. Was that or that was how they used the money? That the whole idea was that they were going to get the money back, and trade was going to open up, and as a result, the country was going to become westernized, and the people were going to realize that they could have Apple phones and Coca-Cola, and that was going to bring them around to the West and to overthrow the mullahs in this regime. But instead, the people haven't gotten any benefit of the money, but in fact, it's been put into these kind of military operations. That's the flip side of the argument. Do you think there's any truth in that?
Well, yeah, look, the Quds Force, the primary driver for Iranian, influence and meddling throughout the region and elsewhere around the globe, the Quds Force is deeply enmeshed into every aspect of the Iranian economy. So when you talk about all that money going back into Iran, that money is not going into community projects. That money is primarily being controlled or monitored or divvied up in part by the Quds Force. And so, yes, it is used to further strengthen their actions, their proxy actions through Hezbollah and others. So, and it's interesting. I mean, look, Netanyahu was just in Moscow. And part of the reason he was in Moscow was to deconflict with the Russians, to say enough is enough. We have to take action against Iran. The Russians have their own interests in Syria. But it's interesting. This is a very interesting dynamic because the Russians only have so much influence over the Iranians. They're not going to be able to tell the Iranians what to do.
Mike, I could listen to you all day, but we're out of time. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank God you don't have
to. Okay, no, we'd like to. Thank you.